ready as well. Same, Mad Season videos are the same as Christmas dinner. I don't have to worry about whether he's going to have a good take on this, or I'm not worried about whether he's going to do a good job on the video. It's already a 10 out of 10. Unless he fucking drops a clanger, it's already a 10 out of 10.
Nintendo announces the release of their next system, the Nintendo 64. But will Zelda make the jump?
How do you do an adventure game in 3D? Nintendo couldn't simply go to a store, buy another game and said, oh, they did it right, because nobody did it right.
Stay with me.
Loud.
Willst thou run? Or fly?
Zelda sees the video game industry, and all the fans have to do now is
Get ready for the most anticipated game of all time. The Legend of Zelda, the Ocarina of Time.
The epic intro.
The year is 1995, and for the past 9 years, the world has been reeling from a sickness. Zelda fever. From the ashes left behind by the video game crash of 1983, the gaming industry had entered a golden era, and at the forefront were two competing developers, Nintendo and Sega. Up until this point, the reigning champions of home consoles were largely dominated by Intellivision, ColecoVision, and Atari, and as more and more
I had an Atari.
people migrated away from the arcades to the comfort of their living rooms, they would experience an entirely different form of entertainment. The flashing lights, the clattering of buttons, joysticks, and quarters were replaced with the solitude of home, holding just a system, a cartridge, a controller, and a willingness to let oneself get lost into a whole new world. However,
I'm gonna have to pause it sometimes, and it's going to take us more than an hour to watch this, and I don't want to interrupt his flow because it's lovely, but I'm reacting to it as well. It was important that when I grew up, there was these machines, and they were in these venues, and I had to wish for them. Can I have £1 to play on the machine? It wasn't £1, was it? It was 10p back then. Can I have 10p to put in the machine? But yeah, I had an Atari, and then I had I played Prince of Persia. A friend of mine had it, and I played it on. I know exactly the feeling of playing Prince of Persia on the PC back then as well. And then I had an Atari, and I had a NES, and then I had a Super Nintendo and an N64, and but I was back then with the Atari, having the ability to play even something simple like Asteroids or whatever in the home. And I was quite young, but it meant that we didn't have to. Can I have 10p? Can I have 10p? Can I? It was like I've got my own arcade machine. And I remember even as a little kid, I used to believe that when it got to this stage of the game, like when I was growing up, that I would have my own arcade machine in my house. And I didn't ever really realise, and obviously, as I grew up, we got the N64 and they got better. I didn't, when the N64 level, it was all of a sudden, I have kind of got an arcade machine in my house, Street Fighter 2 as well, on the Super Nintendo, I have got an arcade machine in my house. And I always felt so lucky that from that, just that simple move from, can I have 10p, can I have 10p, to I've got it in my house. I thought that was amazing. And now today, I've got the arcade, like the Super Nintendo Switch, isn't it? The Nintendo Switch. I've got that. That's an arcade machine that I can carry around in my hand. Like, better than an arcade. And I'm doing it through a computer that I can do even better than any of that. It's amazing how far we've come. I've got virtual reality and everything. I'm so lucky. But back then, I remember this and just the happiness of being able to do it at home, yeah.
This period of growth was soon followed by another of decay. Where there's massive profit to be made, there are those willing to race to obtain it, even at the cost of quality standards. And as a result, the US market had not only become oversaturated, it had become oversaturated with poor quality, harming not just the personal reputation of the developers, but also that of the industry as a whole, as consumers began to lose trust in home consoles. This, combined with the increasing popularity of the personal computer, the industry would suffer losses the likes of which it had never seen before.
It was like a big
In
bubble and a crash.
1983, it had broken new records, reporting a revenue of over $3 billion. But by the time the dust had settled in 1985, this would shrink by 97% to $100 million. Publisher and developer alike folded under the strain. But where many saw adversity, others saw opportunity, and when the Nintendo Entertainment and Sega Master Systems hit store shelves in the US in 1986, the industry once more would forever change.
Maybe the most addictive toy in history, and it's definitely the hottest thing this Christmas. Nintendo.
It is weird for me because obviously I lived this, but I lived it as a kid. So I didn't understand any of this economic context or any of this. I just wanted to play Mario. I just wanted to play Zelda. I didn't have Zelda on the NES. I had it maybe for a bit and swapped it, or I had the other games. You didn't get all the games. You couldn't have every game. And while I played Zelda for a while, I think I swapped it because I found it difficult. Back then as a kid, you didn't have save states and all this, but I wasn't into it on the NES as much as I was as I got onto it on the later systems. But this is my childhood, isn't it?
Video games. They first arrived from Japan 3 years ago, and now millions of American kids are hooked and mesmerized. When they do stop to talk, it's in a language only they understand.
With their release came franchises so well crafted that they would restore consumer confidence and thrust the industry into a bright new future. The 80s and 90s were still a period of growth, experimentation.
I also want to shout out, I love Nintendo. Some people were talking in chat earlier about Sega, and Sega as well. My mate had a Sega system, but I always felt like okay, Sega had Sonic and it was Sega and Sonic, but I felt like Nintendo was a bit more holistic, if that makes sense. There was a bit more of a cohesive feel to it, like the Nintendo, what we would call today a Nintendo universe or the metaverse. All the different characters and they're in the different games, and there's I don't know. I just always felt like Nintendo were like a bit more of a family feel, more inclusive. Like we had games like the Duck Hunt thing, everyone can shoot the gun. I didn't have the gun, but I don't know, I just always felt like drawn towards Nintendo. I know it's silly because it's a company, but as a kid I'm playing these pieces of media and I'm attached to them in the same way as kids might get attached to Disney films or something. I always felt compelled and I'm going to say in love with, in a way, like romantically drawn to, attached to. I'm a Nintendo person. Like when I used to read the comics, there was the Beano and the Dandy. I used to get both comics, but there'd be like the Beano fan club and the Dandy, and then there was the Whizzer and Chips comic. And in the Whizzer and Chips, it's one comic called Whizzer and Chips, and it's got like two different, the Whizzites and the Chip Kids. And do you like the Whizzer comic, or do you like the Chips? Do you like Whizzer or Chips? Like which side of the? And I was like, well, I read both comics. I like it all. Like I like Nintendo, I like Sega, but if you have to put me in a camp, I'm going to be a whiz kid. I'm not a chipite. I just feel like if you had to put me in a camp, I'm going to be a whiz kid, not a chipite. And with this, I just felt like Nintendo, like it's like a love thing. I just love Nintendo. And it's a company, and I'm not like, oh, capitalism, love companies, but like it had a vibe, man. It had a vibe. And that's just who I am, a Nintendo person. I had a NES, a Game Boy, a Super Nintendo, an N64. I could get a tattoo of Nintendo and not feel like, what am I doing this for? This is weird. I just get a Nintendo tattoo, just very happily, and it would just be like, yeah, that's part of me. That's always been a part of me. Always loved it. Always been like throughout my childhood and early adulthood. And then there was a time I went away from playing video games, but then like we're back to Nintendo. Yeah, like vibes, Nintendo. Like, it's weird, isn't it, though? It is weird, but I think it's because they produce a media thing. Like, I think if it was just they were producing cornflakes, I wouldn't feel the same connection. But I think it's because they produce media, like games media. I'm calling games media, or art. They produce works of art, or there is art within it, or whatever. But yeah, real connected.
And therefore, excitement. Formulas weren't yet being perfected. They were being invented. While some would be side-scrolling adventures, testing your coordination, or puzzle-based games testing your wits, an RPG testing your strategic skills, or timing-based titles testing your patience, the possibilities seemed limitless. Every year, each genre...
I never even thought of that as a timing-based game. I didn't think of it like that. Obviously it is. I just realised it. I always thought of it as like the best emulation of boxing we had at the time. But yeah, timing, isn't it?
Was giving birth to legends that would come to define them, offering an intense variety of unique experiences for every type of player. But this itself begged a fateful question, one that Miyamoto and his team asked themselves. What about something that offered all of it?
So this is what we're going to get into now, and he's going to get into, so I'm going to stop pausing it as much, but I wanted to give a huge shout out when he says about Miyamoto and that, like this is why I have that love, is because these people behind the scenes had that same love, and game development isn't the same as other art forms, and there's a lot that goes into it, but if you have that love, it comes through still in the same way. So it's weird that I feel connected to these people that I've never met and will meet, and some of them are dead now, but I feel like I love the things like what they did for me when I was a kid. I can't explain it any better than that. The things they did, like they didn't know they were like making me feel things when I was a kid and throughout life, and now still to this day. But there's a lot of love in that, isn't there? So I love them. I'm grateful to them, and this wonderful thing that they gave us. Obviously, I played all this. Found it really difficult.
And so, a
Never
legend was
completed
born.
that game.
The series would take elements from every genre. The story of an RPG, the action of a side-scroller, the exploration of an adventure game. It had everything wrapped up into one journey, and as a result, it was a series unlike any other. Whereas most were designed to be short but fun experiences, with its battery backup system allowing for saves, this was meant to be experienced over the course of weeks and even months. The story was a humble one, but tapped into the fantasy of every child, regardless of their nationality or gender, what language they speak, or even what time period they grew up in. What is a fallen branch to everyone else, to them, is a mighty sword and the dreams of a grand adventure to save the world. The Legend of Zelda would tap into this worldwide phenomenon as players would control the sword and shield-bearing Link in his quest to save the princess and the world from the ultimate evil, Ganon.
So I played this game, never completed it, found it really difficult when I was a kid, and as I got older, I went back and like retroactively played it. Still didn't get quite to the end. Like ended up doing other stuff with my time. Maybe we should do it on stream at some point, maybe. But it's it's held up to the test of time well. But like what we've got now is so much better. But they were trying to create the vibe. They knew they couldn't do the 3D, the running around, this and that, but they were trying to do their best to create the vibe. And from there, that's the template. And what we have today is still this. There's still these characters, these places, these not the same graphics, but the same images, just told in different quality now. Like this is like old black and white TV, and now we've got like we still have the Octo Rock. Like the enemy in the frame there, I think, is an Octo Rock, and we still have the Octo Rocks, but they look a lot better now. So it's all there, and I think the first game that I really connected with Zelda-wise was the Game Boy version. Probably a few years later than this, but I fully played on that Game Boy one and got all the bits of Triforce and all that.
By exploring the world, unlocking secrets.
Like all these aspects are there as well in the modern games. Bombs, unlocking secrets. Like this is all it was just like it's what I'm struck by is the depth of their ideas back then is still good enough today. It's just if you remake it in today's graphics with today's capabilities, you can have 3D, you can climb up here, you can do this. Okay, there's all these other layers, but the same depth of story, like what Zelda was and what it is, and like what you have to do in the game, it stood the test of time so well that with today's tech, and this same team would have absolutely excelled today. And I hope that today's teams do their memory proud as well.
Through dungeons,
the ones that
and
are dead,
obtaining new gadgets.
I'm assuming some of them are dead.
Would become an instant success.
I'm assuming some of them are dead. They might not be dead. Look at all those games. Oh, that would have got me so hard when I was a kid. Look at them all. Some of them I recognised that I owned, and a lot I didn't. A lot of the Game Boy Advance stuff I never played. A lot of the DS stuff I never played. But the one in the middle that's standing out for me, absolutely screaming out to me, is this one in black here. That one. That's one I fucking played, I'm telling you. I think the difference between that one and that one is I think this one might be the American one and this one might be the European one. Pretty sure mine was this black one. Pretty sure. Maybe that's like a we've sold 1 million copies one, but I'm pretty sure that was the one.
spawning spin-offs, TV shows,
Well, excuse me, princess.
merchandise, and of course sequels. And leading up to the release of Nintendo's 64-bit console, the series was 4 in number, each being received with critical acclaim.
That Game Boy one.
You've killed me.
Good.
Except for these ones, which for the best interest of everyone, don't exist. The ones that did exist, however.
So what he was showing you there was a CD version that was made. Like it was sold, they sold the rights to this weird company, and they did a sort of like animation, choose your own weird game. And let's not talk about it anymore. It was bad. But these ones I recognise.
However, were The Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link on the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1986 and 87, and in 1991, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past on its descendant, the Super Nintendo. And finally, in 1993, Link's Awakening on the portable Game Boy.
That was...
Though each new release was received just as favorably as the last, they would be more iterative than innovative.
Yeah.
So when it came time for Nintendo's leap into the new dimension, one single question started to grow louder as time passed. When's the next Zelda game?
He's got it so right. He set that tone so well. He set the scene so perfectly. Adverts, but he hasn't he? He's done such a good job there, Mad Season, of setting. That's how I felt when I was a kid. He only briefly talked about the Game Boy version, but do you remember how the Game Boy cartridges were smaller, and then the little picture on them was smaller, and it looked, for some reason, when you shrink something down like that, it's like even more exquisite. Like, look at it, the little picture, and then it's Zelda in the Game Boy, and you had to get all the little bits of Triforce. That was chef's kiss as well. You like my blue hair? And then everyone was like, we had the new games systems. Like, I remember getting an N64 and it being barren of titles. Like, I wanted it early. I had to wait for Christmas, obviously, but so there were a few games out. Or it might have been my birthday, depending on when it was released in the year. But, you know, I had to wait for the special event and then get my, I want this. Can I have my games console, please? I'm pretty sure it was that sort of business. I was been like, you know, like 12 or 13 or something. Like, you know, like, I can't remember the exact date, so you'll probably tell us. But, yeah, the wait for the games and like the excitement that it was coming out, like the new Zelda game, like that sort of aspect of it, cannot be underestimated. Like nowadays, you still have that excitement. We're waiting for the new Zelda game. It's going to come out tomorrow, and we've waited for a long time. But in the meantime, there's an awful lot more to do. Like if Zelda comes out tomorrow and I don't play it, I'm not going to be like, oh shit, I'm waiting for the games and I haven't got anything to do. I've got so much to do, like games, even just games-wise, not just in life general. But am I affiliated to Nintendo? Not at all, no. Although I did have someone who was in my film, Ed Valiante, who used to do the Nintendo Directs for Europe and stuff. He worked for Nintendo Europe, and he's in my documentary about video games that's on the channel on Super Chuffer. So that was good. Yeah, I should be affiliated. I don't think they need me to sell their stuff. I think they do all right without me. But yeah, this wait for this game and the anticipation and the idea that it was a new system with new, like, he kind of briefly jumped over the Super Nintendo, which was a huge step up from the NES. Like the Super Nintendo was like, it's got a Sony chip. It went from 8-bit to 16-bit. It feels like you're doubling the power. And then the same with 16 to 64. It was like a big number jump. Like these days we don't talk in those terms. Andy Cockle says, still awake. Thought I'd give it a look. Big ups. We're reacting here to this video about the Nintendo and Ocarina of Time. We've just got to the bit where they're about to release Ocarina of Time, and I'm getting hyped. And it's an hour long, and if I keep pausing it, it'll take us 10 hours, so I need to let it roll.
The story of Ocarina of Time begins in 1994, where its working title was simply Zelda 64, which, like many other releases, referred to the console's processing power. From pixels to polygons, Nintendo and Sega were in an all-out war. When the new Mario arrived, Sega would answer back with Sonic. For every Final Fantasy, there was a Phantasy Star, and for every Contra, there was a Gunstar Heroes. Though these games were worthy enough through their designs alone, one of the main marketing strategies for these developers revolved around their graphical capability, thrusting the industry in what is referred to today as the Bit Wars.
Now, I understood that that was happening, but I never was interested in the graphical capability over the gameplay. Give me gameplay any day. And I always felt that Nintendo, whilst Sega sort of sometimes lauded it over Nintendo with, we've got slightly better graphics, not dramatically better, and I'd rather have gameplay over graphics. So if you've been spending all your time on graphics and you forgot to put the gameplay element in, then it might fall down. So I always felt more compelled to stick with my Nintendo during this time as well. I never felt compelled, oh, this other machine might have slightly better graphics, I better jump ship. No, I always felt like stick it out with Nintendo. I like what they do. I'm not concerned if someone tells me they've got a slightly better bits or whatever.
What Nintendo? The 16-bit Genesis system by Sega.
You like Sonic the Hedgehog?
Does it all.
Though the third dimension was flirted with releases such as Mario Kart, F-Zero, or Sonic 3 and Knuckles, the real question was, who would be the first to master it? This marked an iconic moment within the industry where the characters on screen started to actually resemble the creatures that they were supposed to. However, for those tasked...
We gave it a lot of leeway back then. Like, we knew this didn't look exactly right, but we gave it leeway because it was the first time we'd seen 3D. You should have seen FIFA. FIFA 64 was a nightmare. It was like a clunky nightmare because of all these polygonical, clunky characters, but it was 3D football, so fuck you, I'm enjoying it.
With guiding these beloved characters smoothly into this new world, it was as intimidating as it was exciting, and while some would send their franchises into hopeful futures, others were hopeless failures.
And I think it does matter about the style of the game as well, because at this point, if you try and go for realism, it's not going to come out well. But with Mario, it's a cartoony sort of vibe, isn't it? And the same with Zelda, it's got its own art style that seemed to work, so it translated well to this.
Setting them back years. And for the Zelda team, considering that there were no 3D adventure games that they could take inspiration from, the only option was to be the one that would inspire others. They would entertain the thought as early as 1994 for the Super Nintendo, which would make use of the Super FX chip, a powerful coprocessor that facilitated advanced 3D graphics, paving the way for titles such as Star Fox or the console port of Doom. The series would have implemented the power of this chip by way of a pseudo-remake of its side-scrolling iteration, Zelda 2, where Link would have a third dimension added to him. However, it would never come to pass, and though there's no official answer as to why, it's theorized that it was due to the Super Nintendo entering its twilight years and the team missing their window of opportunity.
The new Nintendo 64. So what's the big deal, and why is Toys R Us already sold out?
Go back over the bridge. Go over the, no, go back over the bridge. You gotta go over the bridge.
I'm gonna bug my mom to get it.
But
do you remember playing the machine in the supermarket or in the game shop? You go in like in the shop and you play the machine in the shop. And like, oh my god, there's the game and it's free to play and it's on the demo. Oh my god. And like, oh, no, come on, we've got to go and do the shopping now. No, I want to stay and play the game. Oh mom, can't you leave me here and I'll play the game while you do the shopping? Like, you know, I remember playing the machine in the shop.
With the Nintendo 64 on the horizon,
Sarah, yeah, we've got the chat on the screen now, yeah.
And they would not let this one slip past them. Early concept work was performed by a small team, including Jin Akita and Takao Shimizu. Right from pre-production, one of their primary goals was to harness everything that these 3D worlds could offer, starting with what was perhaps the most important, its perspective. Though the game eventually landed on the third person, its initial design was derived from the abandoned FX remake. While Link would be a third-dimensional sprite, Hyrule would be a two-dimensional side-scrolling adventure. However, this failed in capitalizing on the great potential that the console offered, and would quickly make way for a first-person interpretation. Similar in gameplay to From Software's iconic Kingsfield series, except when Link would face an enemy, it would switch to a two-dimensional perspective. Though echoes of this design would come to fruition in segments that required precision aiming, it would not serve as the core design in fear of losing identity, as in a completely first-person perspective, Link would rarely be visible.
Yeah, good choice.
One of the few options left would prove to be the most viable, the third person. And though it was a difficult choice, the proven success of Mario 64 would be the nudge that they needed to commit to the perspective that would eventually become standard for them.
Like, you need to see Link and know that you're controlling this little green chuffer to become Link. It's really weird, isn't it? Because you would say first person, it's you in your frame of view, so you'll feel like you're really doing it. So much more immersive, it's you really doing it. Yeah, but the stories of Link, and now I feel that I am Link in some way. Like Ganji Kid is Link. Like Link, I am that Link. Like you had your Link and I had my Link, and my Link was Ganji Kid, little Kokiri warrior, and he went out and he fucking saved the world. And then in the next game, it was like his like ancestor or whatever has come, or, you know, and it's little got the Ganji Kid DNA, and it's my turn. And like your Link is your Link, and my Link's my Link. And like you're right in chat. Have fun in chat if you want. It's on the telly, yeah. But I remember this like feeling of like, you know, seeing him changing his clothes and everything. I think it's really important that we got to see him, and I'm surprised now that he's pointing it out. It's a really intelligent point from Mad Season. I would have thought that first person made me more connected with the character because I am the character, but actually third person made me much more connected because I could see the character. And even though I would have a lot of empathy for and be interchanging Link's role with my role in my imagination as I'm playing, you know, like when you play with your soldiers or your little wrestler men, like, or with this, I'm playing with the character and I'm interchanging their perspective and my perspective. I'm doing the stuff, I'm going through the missions, I'm fighting the baddies, you know. But I'm Link and Link is me. Like, we're interconnected in that way. Like, I'm sure you all understand that if you love Zelda. Like, you are the character and they're interconnected in some way. These are the great beauties of artworks, like great works of literature, you know, feeling connected with those characters and interconnected. And then like we need our own pictures, don't we? We need MIMP pictures. You've all got your pictures. We need MIMP pictures. Yeah, I think this is a big part of it, and I'm so surprised that I didn't realise that it was simply about the perspective, and then it's better with the third person.
The series, and with this problem solved, they moved on to another of equal size, the swordplay.
Swordplay, which they got fucking bang on, and I've loved all my life.
As remarkable as it was at the time, the combat in Zelda games was relatively simple, though sometimes trickery or ingenuity were required. Most often, it was walk up to an enemy, slash, and then walk to the next. And the team knew that this would not suffice in an industry that was becoming more demanding with each passing day. Shimizu would be inspired by the Chenbara genre of movies, which highlighted samurai sword fighting. This style of sparring would rely heavily on athleticism, zoning, reaction speed, and windows of opportunity.
That was a cute little editing trick.
A simple swipe of the sword, Link would have to be able to maneuver around in the heat of combat in this new dimension, and getting around the guard of his enemies while holding his own. They would gain inspiration from a performance at the Toei Kyoto Studio Park, a form of theme park where attendees can watch drama shows. One of the shows featured a group of ninja surrounding a lone samurai, and one had attacked with a sickle and chain. But the samurai caught it with his left arm, stretching the chain tight as the ninja continued to circle him and keeping his focus on one. This was the solution. If there's a way that the player could input a command to focus on one single enemy, the camera would be able to keep both in view unhindered, and, with Link always facing them, allow for the fluid movement and athleticism that was iconic to the fighting style.
And it works
as well as
so well.
making precision shots in the heat of combat.
And to this day,
for this, they devised a feature that would innovate not just the series, but the action-adventure genre as a whole.
Done.
Z-targeting, where with the press of a button, the camera will shift behind Link and lock him facing an enemy or object, and swing a sword or shoot an arrow in that direction. Though today something like this is quite standard, this would be one of the very first iterations of a lock-on system, and it paved the way for many games that are now considered to be staples of the genre. As a result, the player had full control in both attacking and guarding against enemies, even when surrounded, and at the same time, being able to maneuver Link accurately through an active duel.
That was the mirror fight.
New depth of combat.
That mirror fight was an absolute joy, and because of this combat system, I loved this combat system.
Using motion capture technology, adding yet another layer of realism. And they also caught critical inspiration in how the fights were choreographed. The outnumbered hero emerging victorious against all odds is an unrealistic, but fundamental component of all action movies.
True.
Something that they knew was critical in making a grand and memorable adventure. But how is it achieved? Well, this question is answered with another. One that anyone asks themselves as they're watching these fights take place.
You can't fight.
Why don't they just attack him all at once?
Yeah, and this is true. You can't fight because we did sword fighting, fencing. We learned about this sort of stuff. You can't defend against multiple enemies like this because you can't watch your own back if they did attack at the same time. So it is about timing, and these films make it look like you're having a big fight, but they're taking their turns really. With a good game, they should. Obviously, Zelda's going to not just try and kill you every time, isn't it? So they implement this a bit. But I would also say, as a good player, you try and line up your opponents so you get them in rhythm rather than they all have to get... Like, if you go and stand in the middle and they all come at you, that's bad. But if you take them in a route, like, you can avoid getting ganged up on, so...
Well, of course, it's for...
Chat's going mad because it's on the telly.
Entertainment. A certain amount of suspended disbelief must be held in order to create entertaining fight sequences, and the team would translate this directly to the game. Though there are many times where Link is surrounded by enemies, in true Chambara style, they'll most often attack just one at a time, giving the player the feeling of being that hero who overcame the odds. But, of course, there's much more to a Zelda game than just its swordplay, and as monumental of a task this was, it would be just a taste of the challenges that they would face in its development.
Little Marios. He's having fun with his little Marios at the event. They're all at the event there in Japan or some shit. I never went to anything like that. Playing little Marios.
Every day that passed was invaluable and pushed the team closer to Space World, a Nintendo-owned convention that previewed various in-development products. And while the team wouldn't have an engine or gameplay ready at the time, they would have
take a bathroom break. I'll just let it run.
And it was then that the public, for the first time, would lay eyes on Zelda 64. The fan base erupted. Beyond its advanced graphics, swordplay such as this seemed beyond reproach, and the fact that it would be central to the entire game was a difficult thing to wrap their heads around. And though Shimizu's influence would guide Zelda 64 throughout its development, he would be called away to work on Star Fox 64. Regardless, the demo and news of the game would reach the West in January of 1996 through Nintendo's official magazine, Nintendo Power, in their preview of the Nintendo 64. But for now, in their own words, they could only admire the 12-second demo and fantasize what the first 3D iteration of the world of Hyrule would look like. Development continued at a steady but slow pace as it would occur alongside Super Mario 64. Despite Link's popularity, he would take a back seat to Nintendo's Italian mascot, as many key figures, including Miyamoto himself, were more than preoccupied with Mario's first 3D adventure.
They did tend to do this. They did tend to focus on one thing at a time, didn't they? You'd get your Mario game, then you'd get your Zelda game, and it's kind of still a bit like that.
Touring studio shows for inspiration were now hundreds in number.
All right there, Brenda.
With the tremendous success of Mario 64, the team had gained a critical surge of confidence. Not only would Mario inspire it, they would even initially share the same developmental framework, with one major difference. It would be disc-based.
This never happened. Shut up with your adverts. Get off. Get away. This never happened.
This format was not something new for the franchise at this point. When most people think of Zelda 1, the first image that pops into their minds is the classic golden cartridge, but when it was first released in Japan on the Famicom in 1986, it would be exclusive to its disc-based peripheral, and the motivations behind it would mirror the same for Ocarina's development a decade later. The scope of a world as massive as Hyrule demanded more memory. The Nintendo 64 disk drive, or 64DD, was a magnetic floppy drive accessory for the console, holding its own rich history of development. Though a relatively obscure peripheral today, In 1996, it was central in discussions surrounding the console, as it held within it the potential to
You're living in a
thrust the
different world,
industry
mate. That never
into
happened.
a new era with its ability to store an additional 64 megabytes of rewritable storage.
Listen, sometimes I wonder if we've gone down the wrong leg of, like, you know, when they do like on the sci-fi and there's like the world splits down a decision and one line goes one way, like, you know, Quantum Leap, it's gone two different ways, like, you know, the world's gone two different ways, and like in one world JFK got shot and in the other world JFK didn't get shot, and like you've jumped timelines. That's it, jumping timelines. I feel like I've jumped timelines. This didn't happen. Like, fucking grow up. What are you on about? This never happened. I never had a disk drive for my fucking N64. Are you a nutter? Like, this didn't happen. And like, I also think about that timelines thing. If it, you know, the timelines thing, we're on the wrong timeline. Like, oh, thank God we won the war. It would have been worse if we didn't win the war. Yeah, that. But wouldn't it have been worse if, like, isn't it bad that Hitler did the killing of all the Jews and was bad? Like, isn't there a different timeline where Hitler wasn't a fucking nutter and everything was just all right? We're already down the bad timeline. That's why bad shit keeps happening down this timeline. It's because, like, we're taking the hit for an alternate us that's having a great time out there somewhere. I'm having a reasonably good time, but, you know, there's another one of me on a different timeline having a really good time, and I'm taking the hit for them.
As well as holding
So
a
look,
real-time
this didn't happen anyway, so don't get your hopes up about a disk drive. This is just made up.
clock, allowing for things such as persistent world design.
Again,
can
no.
Connect through the internet through a service called RandNet
No.
for online gaming, as well as media sharing. And it was one of the first ways that Nintendo...
There's no way my N64 could go on the internet, so don't be stupid. The internet didn't exist. I don't know what he's going on about here.
Nintendo would bridge the gap between
mouse.
PC and console gaming.
No.
What was perhaps its biggest selling point, however, was that Zelda 64, due to its sheer scope, would be exclusive to it.
I'm not
exactly how it would be implemented is.
I feel like I might have dementia, and this might be me, like, you know, not understanding the world properly in my dementia. This didn't happen. There was no N64 PC mouse disk drive attachment. It simply didn't happen.
Unclear, but Miyamoto suggested tapping into its ability to create persistent worlds, that every action that the player performed would change Hyrule, such as picking a flower and another variety growing in its place sometime later. This wasn't going to be just the biggest Zelda game, this was going to be one of the biggest games, period. And so, development continued, and when Space World 1996 arrived, Zelda 64 would make a small appearance in a promo for the console. Though the trailer previewed other popular titles, such as Mario Kart, Star Fox, and GoldenEye in full detail,
had it good back then.
The whole 12 seconds of footage of the new Zelda would dominate the discussion and would be tirelessly combed over by the rabid fan base.
Always been the way.
This was no tech demo, and as short as it was, fans bursted at the very first glimpse of its actual gameplay. This was the first time that they laid eyes on it since its unveiling over a year ago. Its first official screenshots were shared in issue 94 of Nintendo Power in January for Japan and March for the West, teasing familiar locations such as Death Mountain, an early iteration of Kakariko Village, as well as Hyrule Castle. It seemed to be progressing at a steady pace, but unbeknownst to them, there was a problem. One so large that it would not only cripple its development cycle, but also threaten its very existence.
There were demos in 96, and they said, yep, it's
Problems.
coming out soon. There were demos in 97, they said, yep, it's coming out soon.
Zelda problems.
Zelda 64's development today is known for its many delays, most of which relating to the disk drive. As powerful as it was, it had one fatal flaw. It wasn't the size of the memory that counted.
It didn't exist, that's the
flaw. It was
flaw.
how you used it. Though technically they were less powerful, cartridges had advantages over disk drives. One of the biggest being
I always
was
liked the
that they had
cartridges.
no moving parts, which
I still
allowed
like the
for
cartridges
instant
today.
retrieval of any piece of data, such as
Exactly.
the animation
You can't
of
scratch
Link
them either,
swinging
can you?
his sword, or that of the enemy being struck by it. A magnetic disc, on the other hand, requires it to spin in the proper position, and the magnetic head to position itself correctly in order to retrieve it. And
Yeah.
no matter how fast this process could be, it would not be instantaneous, so a simple fight would become
always thought the
extremely
cartridges were
sluggish
good.
as the disc struggled to keep up with the read functions. While this wouldn't be a problem for simpler or slower paced games, as you could fit the patterns into memory and read them beforehand, Zelda was far from simple, as it held over 500 animations, and far from slow-paced, owing much of its success to the action portion of action-adventure. The game would look better, and it would be bigger, but it would be at the expense of fluid combat that defined the series. And additionally, putting this problem aside for a moment, the disc drive itself would become one of Nintendo's biggest commercial failures.
It didn't exist.
It would only see a total of 9 discs released.
It didn't
and the
exist.
peripheral itself wouldn't be finished until 1999.
It simply didn't
a full
exist.
year after Zelda 64's eventual
Why do they keep
release,
saying? Why
and
does it
due
keep
to its
saying it
obscurity,
exists?
It's become something of a collector's item today.
Fucking thousands of
And
pounds
so,
for that.
A fateful decision was
Rubbish.
made. It would not debut on the disc drive as advertised, and the can was kicked down the road through the form of a promise. While Zelda 64 would not be disc-based,
no,
its remake would be.
Because it didn't exist. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time era.
In recent times, remakes have become quite popular. Developers have honed in on the power of nostalgia, and today they're in abundance. But for a game to have a remake just 1 year later was certainly a rare occurrence, one that spawned out of a failed promise. Zelda 64 was marketed quite heavily to be an exclusive to the peripheral, and the team felt obligated to fulfill their commitment in some way, and so a remake, Ura Zelda, was born. This would be a return to their original version for the game, tapping into the extra memory and the read and write functions that the magnetic disc offered, as well as remixing dungeons and providing new challenges. But there was a problem. The director in charge for the project, Eiji Aonuma, was not happy as he didn't consider it to be a true Zelda game, and he protested the development of what he thought to be a mere rehash. Instead,
I don't remember any
he
of this.
believed that
I just remember waiting for my Zelda game
to reuse the assets from the Ocarina of Time, but to create a whole new experience.
Look at
and
the
story.
interface.
In response, Miyamoto issued him a challenge. If you can do this within 1 year, you'll have your wish. This monumental challenge
That's
would
not Ocarina of
result
Time.
in a momentous sequel,
That's
Majora's Mask. Aonuma would become the producer of the series, a title he still holds proudly to this day. And as for Ura Zelda, it too would see a release, and fans today know it as the Master Quest for the next generation console, the GameCube. And so
What's going on?
finally, after over a decade, the Ocarina of Time in its original vision saw a release in the form of a remake. Though considering that this was their original intent, it may be more accurate to say that the smaller cartridge-based release.
Am I confused, right? What he's saying is that later on they released a game that was the original, but it was different. So I'm confused. But
was the true remake.
It was the remake. You just confused the fuck out of me there. Show me the what I know to be true. Forget this fucking disc nonsense. Show me that
The severity
cartridge.
of the setback could not be overstated. Maps had to be downsized, dungeons and zones had to be cut entirely, and pre-rendered backdrops were used in place of actual interactive
I remember that little bit.
environments. Every single bit was stretched to its absolute max, and the game itself would run at a maximum of a mere 20 frames per second.
So you're saying there was a better Ocarina of Time? It came on a disc. Right, wait, let me get this in my head. You're saying there was a better Ocarina of Time,
crippled by this turn of,
and it came on a disc, but that didn't get released really because like fucking no one had this disc drive thing. So years later, they re-released that as like a updated super version on like the GameCube or something, and you could get like what it was supposed to be, but they wasn't happy with it or some shit. But then back to where we are now in our world, in the wrong trouser leg of time, there was Sleep Your Chance of Dreams having to go to sleep now because it's getting too confusing. There was actually like, so what they did is they took that stuff off that disc and said, right, let's do the best we can on a cartridge because the disc was bigger but couldn't read as fast or something. And now we've got this. I thought Ocarina of Time was like the definitive, but it turns out it could have been better. Is that what we're saying? It's weird.
Events and
pared down
inspired
a
by
bit.
the success of Mario, the team had entertained the idea of Hyrule Castle serving as a hub, much like Peach's Castle, where Link would traverse to different locales by jumping through paintings. The open world of Hyrule would be cut, but the size of the other locations would remain intact. It wasn't ideal by any means, but with the game having lost the raw power that the disc drive provided, it certainly was tempting. But not tempting enough. and the tough decision was made to downsize areas and remove others entirely, and the game had become undeniably smaller than that of its original design.
Wow. And it was still amazing. Best thing ever. And yet it was a pared-down
Nintendo
version.
64 Zelda was delayed because it was just such an epic, humongous game.
But that doesn't mean that it was small, and so they returned to their plan of the open world design, though echoes of the Mario iteration can be found in the Phantom Ganon boss of the Forest Temple, where Link must battle him as he jumps in and out of paintings.
Classic.
Setbacks and their consequential delays aside, the team continued on, and in E3 1997 in June, another major footage drop would occur. This, along with more screenshots, would paint a detailed picture of how it's evolved, such as making use of the Nintendo 64 C buttons, where including the sword, available on-demand gadgets were upgraded from 2 to 4. And in Space World later in the year, it would finally be given its official name, The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time. It was at this point that the game had started to closely resemble what it would eventually become, and attendees were even given a special treat of being able to play it. The team had prepared a demo for fans to explore small areas of the game, including dungeons, the open world, and even some bosses, which gave them a feel for what the game would be, as well as ultimate bragging rights to their friends. Gameplay, information, and screenshots were in abundance at this point. In its release month, Nintendo Power would release a full 18-page coverage of its gameplay, as well as previews of the first 3 dungeons. This was the kids' version of the Ark of the Covenant, complete with the most prized possession of all, the golden cartridge, continuing the tradition of the special collector's edition that started with its debut. And so, as release day grew closer, anticipation grew larger. This was one of the games that, if you didn't pre-order, you were returning home empty-handed. Stores had to predict how many copies that they would be able to sell when making orders, and nearly all would underestimate the power of Zelda, and stores around the world would sell out almost immediately. In fact, the demand was so high that weeks before its eventual release, stores had to even halt pre-orders, as supply just couldn't keep up with the demand. In the US alone, pre-orders eclipsed over 500,000, more than...
This is obviously never going to happen again because we just do digital download now, don't we?
Tripling that of any video game ever released on any console at that point. On release day, this would pass 1 million sold, and a month later, 2.5 million. Zelda fever was alive and well, and it was spreading to levels never before seen. The moment of truth was here. After years of development and delays,
and incredibly a bigger game that got made. And I guess in some ways, actually, right, if you have like an album and you've got 15 songs and you have to cut it down to 12, then you just lose the worst ones, don't you? And you keep the best bits. So although some backdrops and some of this and that, overall, I'm guessing when these decisions were made, maybe some of the stuff that wasn't or didn't need to, or I was iffy about this, okay, we'll cut that, and you get a much tighter game. Maybe there are some benefits to it being cut down, but I'm forever wondering what the biggest what it would have been on that disc drive, and whether I should go and play that game if it still exists, like you said. But there's us on Epona with our carrots, so shut up, this was brilliant.
From 1994 to 1998, all of these trials were put to the test. Was the Ocarina of Time a game worthy of bearing the name The Legend of Zelda?
Best game ever. Best game ever.
The game is finally released in both Japan and the US, and immediately sweeps both countries.
Many today look back at the Ocarina of Time as the greatest game ever made.
Yeah.
In 1998, they thought the same. It had received perfect or near perfect scores from everyone in the industry, whether they be professional critic or casual player. As expected, it followed the formula set standard by the series, but to another level. When writers Toru Osawa, Kensuke Tanabe, and cinematic director Takumi Kawagoe were tasked with delivering the narrative of the Ocarina, they knew the weight of what was asked of them.
The Deku
With
Tree.
a more realistic representation of characters came an increase in potential of cinematic storytelling. It was at this point where characters were actually capable of showing emotion and personality through more than just dialogue. Though this was the 5th game of the series, it was the first of a new era of the Zelda franchise and the gaming landscape as a whole. It wasn't entirely new.
That was
as the Link to the
Dondo's
Past
Cavern.
held a respectable amount of cutscenes to deliver the plot, but this was something else entirely. Much of its 256 megabytes would be dedicated to...
Poach the Narrative says, Zelda triggers me. My twin's dad blanked me completely on my birthday one day as a new Zelda came out. I've moved on. Sorry to hear that.
Cinematic storytelling never before seen by fans. And today, whenever they think back to the Ocarina, the images that pop into their minds
I love this.
are most often from the over 1.5 hours of rich cutscenes that innovated the series.
There's Ganon.
This wasn't just a game, this was a movie. And right from the moment they pressed start, they knew that they were in for an adventure of a lifetime.
Yes, you're right. It was the best game ever. I kind of think it still is. Like, because of the feel, like, these days, you're so, like, what I described, you know, all that weight, all that build-up, this being pushing the new technology to its limits, so big, in fact, it had to be pared down for the new technology. Like, you were getting something, a new step, you know. It was something different. You were moving into colour, like, from black and white. It was something so massive that today you can't, like, the next step on from what we've got today to the next step isn't that big. Like, we work in smaller steps. You know, Breath of the Wild was a big step in itself. That's why that felt so big. So, like, special, so big, because you hadn't seen it before. It was a big step onward. Like, this was such a big step that, like, will a game ever be as, make as big an impression again, you know? So I'm never going to be a little kid again, so back then it didn't take as much to make a big impression, and this was more than enough.
Three goddesses of courage, power, and wisdom have created the land of Hyrule, leaving behind a symbol of their power, the Triforce, which will grant the wishes of anyone who obtains it. Because of its great power, it's been sealed away by 6 sages in the sacred realm inside the ancient Temple of Time. But they did leave behind a path to it. By collecting 3 spiritual stones, which were entrusted to the guardians of Hyrule, one could open the resting place of the Master Sword. And it was prophesized that when the Hero of Destiny pulled it from its pedestal, the door to the Sacred Realm and the Triforce would be opened. At the start of the game, during a prior war, a gravely injured Hylian mother and her child sought refuge in the Kokiri Forest. As her dying wish, the mother pleaded with the father of the village, the Deku Tree, to raise him as one of their own, to which it agreed, as it sensed a great destiny held within him. The forest exists as a form of utopia cut off from the rest of the world, where those who wander in or out become forever lost, eventually turning into skeletal creatures called Stalfos. But there's a problem. The evil king of thieves, Ganondorf, is after the Triforce and has placed a curse on the Deku Tree and is hunting the 3 spiritual stones. And so, Link is tasked with collecting them before Ganondorf does. Though he is successful in his quest, as he draws the sword from its pedestal, he's caught in stasis, allowing Ganondorf to sneak into the temple and steal the Triforce of power, and using it to throw Hyrule out of balance, and twisting it to the forces of dark and despair.
Good night, Stinky Socks. Mad Season's got that voice as well, hasn't he? He's got a very bedtimey sort of voice, and it's late night, yeah. Good night.
7 years later, now an adult, the rest of the game now revolves around finding the sages in 5 major dungeons spread throughout Hyrule to seek their aid in order to banish
Oh, it was so cool as well, because each sage had a different quality. You didn't quite know who it was. And like when you were a kid, you didn't have that. You know, these days it's pretty obvious when the story beats are happening. Oh, this is going to be so and so. But like back then, I was like, oh, this one's turned out to be the sage.
Ganondorf to the underworld and undo the damage he's done, unlocking new tools, weapons, and gadgets along the way.
It's your wall's birthday. Only now, all metal
Sorry about
posters
the
are up to
adverts, you
40% off.
truckers. Back to
one of the first things players would remark on was the sheer size and scope of the world. Hyrule and its size at this point had already largely defined the series, but its transition to the third dimension would pave the way not just for future iterations, but for the genre as a whole. Though the worlds had depth and scale, exploring them would be limited to one screen at a time.
Yeah, this
so
was
being
rubbish.
able to
This is
actually
brilliant.
see the open plains in front of you in such a scale and with such clarity, funny enough, was a relatively innovative feature. And it was at this
Amazing.
point is when video game worlds started to actually feel like worlds.
Yes.
And though scope would be hindered with the loss of the disk drive, by 1998 standards, it was still extremely impressive.
Incredibly impressive.
Apart from being the type of game that forces players to think their way through problems, I think probably the next most important part of the Zelda experience is providing players an opportunity to feel like they are a part of the Zelda world. And I really think that with the 3D environments of the Ocarina of Time, it was really able to create the type of scenario and the type of world where players felt just completely immersed in the surroundings within the game.
But as large as it was only a small part of a much larger world, serving as its heart.
Lon Lon Ranch. Castletown. Hyrule Castle. Kakariko Village, though. Big Kakariko Village, isn't it? Lost Worlds, Lost Woods, Kokiri Forest, the Deku Tree, Zora's Domain, Gerudo Valley, or Gerudo Fortress, Gerudo, and the Colossus. Lake Hylia. I say Hyrule, and Hylians, and Lake Hylia, so I don't know.
And connecting it to a variety of biomes, from the sprawling Hyrule Castle, to the craggy Death Mountain, to Zora's Water Domain, or Gerudo's Desert Sands. The world held variety, dungeons, secrets, wonder, and perhaps most importantly,
Nope.
intimidation. As far as the gameplay is concerned, having proven its success, it had continued its traditional formula, featuring 12 dungeons total, and as is custom, each with their own unique twists, bosses, and puzzles tied to obtaining unique items. Due to the openness of the world, it would give an unrestricted feel, but ultimately was designed to be progressed in a linear fashion, with dungeons holding puzzles that are only solvable with tools.
See, it's not really an open world. You could go anywhere you want, but obviously you're not going over there because you haven't got the thing to get you through the pass. Like, you need to go and do this first. Like, it's an open world, but you've got to do it in this sort of order, and you get this thing, and then you can go through there. And then when you got this thing, you can go and do this. And then you come back to this thing that you always knew was there, and you can use your new thing and get it down or whatever. So there was a bit of that, and that's clever game design, I think. It made you feel that you were open, and, like, you know, you could see everything, could go anywhere, but you still felt you should take this, you know, more directed path. And some open world games do suffer from the fact that if you can really just go anywhere, and the Breath of the Wild suffered from this, because once people got their head around it, the speed run is you basically just get that glider. Before they glitched, now they glitch the game and you can just like fly through the mountain or whatever. But like before they figured out the glitches, you get that glider, you'd be off the thing straight to Ganon. Like you can literally just go straight to Ganon and you can fight him just one on one. Me and the arrows. You've got to be good, but you can do it. Open world, but you know you want to go around the story in the right order. So it's clever to make you do this in a way. I don't know about Dr. Hinton. I don't know what. Don't know what that is. Hang on, I'm trying to copy that. Don't know what it is. Don't know.
From the previous. While straightforward, this serves as a slow and natural way to teach the player how to wield them, and as you progress, the dungeons therefore become more complicated. Of course, when it starts, roadblocks are about all you have. Bombable walls with no bombs, hookshot targets with no hookshot, but slowly and surely, you clear them with your expanded arsenal, and by the time you reach the end, you commence the mastery of over 20 tools that you collected throughout the adventure. Besides enemy difficulty, challenge is steadily ramped up through more labyrinthine layouts or more complicated puzzles. The first being the Deku Tree, which is essentially a tutorial dungeon where the answers are outright given to you. There's one very clear path forward, but as you progress, you're introduced to dungeons where the way forward isn't as obvious.
It was magical to get your new tunic or your new boots or your new shield and work through a new temple with all new challenges within a game that, like, bear in mind these days, some games do take a bit of a 40-hour run or whatever, but back then, like, you had no real idea. You just knew it was big and you knew it was taking a long time, and it would, like, come home after school, you'd play the game and then you wouldn't finish anywhere near. You'd be like, wow, like, this is big. And, like, it'd take weeks to get through Zelda, months probably, to, like, have a really full, like, to when you, like, really felt you'd, like, fully complete, like, months, I think, as a kid. So, like, the size and scope of this, and so discovering a new temple, getting your new boots, like saying, right, tonight I'm doing the water temple, like, that was big. It was like sitting down to a, like, important game of football or something you've been waiting for a week. You'd work your way up there, you gathered all your materials or whatever, and tonight we're doing the water temple. And all of the temples were so good, so cleverly thought out, so individual, they had a lot of character.
Stop acting like you know the way ahead, like you know the rules. There are no rules, man. We're lost.
There are three things in life that are guaranteed: death, taxes, and getting lost in the water temple in the Ocarina of Time. With a transition to 3D, exploration and puzzle solving are opened up to, well, a whole new dimension. Something that the game very overtly touts with its very first dungeon, as it starts with a vertical climb from the bottom to the very top, and then to the underground, just to remind you that you're not simply scrolling room to room anymore. And this is a theme that's carried on and expanded upon throughout the entire game. The musical score was as memorable as ever. The series composer from its birth, Koji Kondo, makes his return, and he wouldn't waste a single bit of the much larger amount of memory and range of instruments.
There she is. I say she because I don't want to do any spoilers for a game that's like 50 years old or however old it is now, like 20 years old. But she's there playing Shake, but we know that's her, really, don't we? The Bolero of Fire, all these musical pieces were so exquisitely woven in. They became part of the game because you have to repeat them and play them, and you don't have to learn them specifically. Like, you don't have to become a musician because you're just playing these buttons. But like, like, they're so interwoven with your enjoyment of the piece and doing it well and having it part of the gameplay to this degree where it becomes interwoven. And I look back on it now and just think it's absolute poetry the way they did this, and each individual music piece had its own feel. And to this day, I don't think any game has really connected music and, like, made music such a central part, and yet it doesn't feel like you're fucking messing about trying to play music all the time in a rhythm game or anything. It's just little da-da-da-da-da-da, and you get these motifs and it stays with you. Like, I think it did such a good job of this. All the chicken you can eat.
Disposal, making it one of the most recognizable soundtracks of the series. Though surprisingly, there was some controversy to be had.
The full soundtrack
Specifically,
was excellent.
The original music for the Fire Temple had to be removed, as it held a chant in Arabic that Nintendo feared would offend Muslims. Along with its graphical capability, another layer of realism and immersion was added through its day-to-night transitions.
That was lovely.
While it certainly wasn't the first game to implement it, due to how well it was done, it would be one of the first to standardize it, changing the world, not just visually, but also functionally. Whereas in the day, you'll find Hyrule Square bustling with activity, at night, you'll find things have settled down a bit, and shops are now closed. There are new townsfolk to talk to, and new secrets to unlock. And this is a concept that would later be expanded upon in the game's direct sequel, The Majora's Mask, where instead of day and night states, the world and its inhabitants would change by the minute during a 3-day cycle. The transitions are extremely quick to minimize situations where you're just burning time waiting for sunrise or sunset. The biggest spot many people remembering is in the very beginning of the game, where you're going from Kokiri Forest to Hyrule Castle, and the gates close just before you can reach it. That is, if you're casual filth who didn't know that rolling is faster. And even still, the time of day is manipulable. In its original design, Link would have been able to pay a small fee to sleep in various inns spread throughout the world, but this was cut, and its functionality would transition to the Ocarina, which, as referenced by the title, would be central in its gameplay, giving you access to a myriad of powers, such as the ability to make it rain, stun enemies, teleport to any dungeon, or even call Epona, Link's now iconic horse, that would also make its premiere in Ocarina. It would also play a key role.
You know, I don't know, because I was only a kid, but me and my sister called it Epona. Like pony, Epona. Not Epona. I love Mad Season. I love him to bits, but I think maybe it's just like cultural, you know, maybe it's just a different way of pronouncing it. Maybe I'm getting it wrong. But me and my sister called it Epona because it was a pony. Epona.
In the game's story, granting you access to the Master Sword, which sets you forward or backwards 7 years, changing both Link and the world visually and...
Wait, I want the music for the Temple of Time, just for the vibes. I know pausing it is going to take ages to get through this video, but I want the Temple of Time. Oh, hang on. Because this is the sort of music that you can have at your funeral, can't you, when people are coming in. I don't know if it's you think it's a Masonic checkerboard? It might have been in the Zelda game. They're Japanese though. They have masons in Japan. I think it might be more likely just to show like the texture and the shape of the room. Like there's lots of different textures, isn't there? Is this Masonic? Might be. I don't know if it is. Let's go back to the Chuffing Game documentary.
Functionally, from its inception, both the story and the gameplay were largely inspired from its predecessor, A Link to the Past, on the Super Nintendo, down to the 3 artifacts you collect in a pure world, to the sages you have to meet in the dark and twisted reincarnation.
It's always kept the same vibe going.
But whether it was the gameplay, the graphics...
This is something that I actually think is incredibly interesting about the Zelda format as well, the franchise, is that, you know, it modernizes in terms of the technology, but it tells the same story again and again. And okay, it tries to change it sometimes. You know, it's this time we're up in the air, now we're in a boat. This is slightly different, but really, you're leveling up so you can get the sword, so you can find the different people from all the different areas. You're going to go to the desert. You're going to see your friends up Death Mountain. You're going to, you know, get all the different people together. Then you're going to fight the main boss. Like, it's always the same sort of story, isn't it? And I don't want it to be dramatically different. I want it to be Zelda every time. I don't want them to try and change and weird spin it. I'm happy that it's a better version and a better version and a more honed version and a better version each time. And as we get on now, we're doing a sequel to Breath of the Wild is what we're coming up to. So we can't expect some of the things to be, like, climbing's not going to have got dramatically better necessarily. Although, you know, mechanics might be interesting, new stuff. But maybe now we start to look for depth of story and once we've got that groundwork in, you know, varying the story in clever ways. But it's interesting that you didn't have to, you know, every Zelda could just be Zelda again. Like you said, it was lifted all the story from the Super Nintendo. I didn't care. Do it again for me, but do it this time it's 3D, and now next time do it with like even sharp. Like, I think that's really good. Yeah, I don't eat pesto straight from the jar, no.
Or the music. It all came together into one complete package. One review would describe it as a walking patent office due to the amount of innovations it held, and whether it was its 3D world design, its lock-on system, dungeons, its day and night cycles, or time traveling, the amount of groundbreaking features it held was certainly impressive. Perhaps the most remarkable of all, however, was its storytelling. On a surface level, Ocarina is a humble tale of a child of destiny on a quest to save the world. However, if one digs deeper, they'll find that it not only has one of the deepest stories of the series, but a video game media as a whole. And to understand it, we must first understand what inspired it, and like many other forms of Japanese media, is heavily influenced by Shintoism.
Shintoism, not Masons. The Shinto Masons.
You have to look after yourself before looking after anyone else.
Shut up, he's in the shower. Ooh, he got his Lynx aftershave. It's not Lynx, it's Dove, so that's a fuck up because I said Lynx, so I ruined your adverts. I should be nicer to the advertising people. Maybe they'll sponsor me to smell nice, but they didn't sponsor me today, so I'm talking all over their adverts. They can shut up. Let's keep going.
Shinto is a religion that's practiced prolifically throughout the country. The word translates into the way of kami, where kami are sacred spirits that exist in objects or elements of nature, such as Fujin, the god of wind, or Raijin, the god of thunder, or even through concepts such as Hachiman, the god of war. And the most important is the sun goddess, Amaterasu, who is responsible for bringing light to the world, though there are said to be over 8 million kami in total. They are worshipped through shrines, either privately at home or publicly, over 100,000 spread throughout the country. Large gates, called tori, are commonly found at each shrine, which serve as pathways to a sacred area.
We kind of have these in Genshin Impact.
And separating it from the outside world. Each is dedicated to a specific kami, depending on the choice and beliefs of the person or community. Those who run a business may have a shrine for Ibisu, who's associated with wealth. Or maybe a student struggling in classes may call for the aid of Tenjin, the kami of academics. And a man suffering from hair loss may pray to Kamigami, the kami of hair. Shinto is atypical for most religions in the sense that it's more
I think Alan's been praying to the kami of being a twat.
A way of life focused on community than it is with any sort of moral code. And instead of worshipping a central deity, those who practice it instead worship the spirits of nature and of past ancestors. One of its most defining characteristics is that the physical world itself is sacred, and where one takes, they must pay back in respect for the life-sustaining bounties of nature. Respect, honor, and dignity are important aspects to the religion, and those who are selfish pollute the world with their greed, distressing its fragile balance. The relationship is reciprocal, and if humans mistreat the world and the kami, they will mistreat them in return. And if humans respect and take care of them and remove pollution, they in turn will take care of the humans. The religion is as old as the country itself and has served as an anchor for harmony and spiritual balance in their culture for as long as they've known.
It's a tale as old as time.
However, just as how its followers may be influenced in positive ways, so too can they in negative ways. Such was the case in the 1900s, where the religion was leveraged by the state for militaristic aspirations. Over time, the state had taken firm control of the finances of the shrines within the country and trained their priests to incorporate teachings and strictures beneficial to the empire, such as hailing the emperor as a divine being, and that life's greatest reward was death in his name.
Ooh.
Respect and the worship of spirits of nature had been misdirected into a living being, and along with the samurai's Bushido code, the state had used the religion to indoctrinate citizens into a nationalistic fervor in order to support their aspirations for growing their empire.
The kami are going to be well angry.
We interrupt this broadcast, bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
It's December 7th, 1941, and Japan has unleashed a surprise attack on American soil.
This has took a turn.
The target was Pearl Harbor, and it marks their entry into the deadliest conflict in human history. The Second World War.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air. President Roosevelt has just announced.
1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Their reasons for entering the war were many, including economic pressure brought on by a lack of resources and a desire for economic and geopolitical growth and a powerful army and naval force to obtain it. Their most powerful weapon of all, however, wasn't a tank, nor a battleship. It wasn't a plane, a rifle, nor a missile, but rather the state's weaponizing of a religion the entirety of the country fervently practiced. Japanese youth would be indoctrinated from birth to the emperor's divine nature,
getting heavy,
and that
isn't it?
they themselves were descendants from the kami and were on a sacred mission. Their will was the will of the emperor and no one else, and to offer up one's life to him was an ultimate honor and privilege. After giving their lives, they gave honor to their family and were taught by state-controlled Shinto priests that they would become kami themselves for their sacrifice and would be worshipped after they had carried out their duty. At the conclusion of the war, after atrocities were answered with more atrocities, the Shinto directive was issued, which differentiated the religion from the state's ideological manipulation of it, referring to the latter as state Shinto, and banned any further practice. The emperor would be forced to publicly renounce his divinity in both Shinto and...
Sorry, that's good then, because that's good now. We've got the green tick, so everything's fixed. We had the nuclear bomb, and now we've got the green tick, so I'm glad everything's fixed over there. Green tick. Things are good now that you've got a green tick.
The emperor would be forced to publicly renounce his divinity in both Shinto and state Shinto today are referenced by a variety of Japanese media, often serving as cautionary tales of the consequences of overambition leading a nation into one of the most devastating losses of life ever witnessed by mankind, and also that the more fervently one clings to an ideal, whether it be religious, political, social, or otherwise, the more vulnerable they become to those who would wish to wield them as weapons to further their own agenda. Antagonists are typically warlords whose lust for power leads they and those around them to paths of destruction.
Because of the context of Japanese culture. I get it now.
Headshot.
The people they rule over suffer, and the protagonists are most often heroes of honor and virtue, serving as purifiers who protect the innocent and restore the balance and respect of nature. Today, now free from the influence of those who would seek to weaponize it, Shinto is practiced willfully and peacefully by over 80% of Japan's population and has returned to its roots of community and harmonious interactions between man, nature, and kami, and Nintendo is just one of countless media companies to incorporate its history as a storytelling device. The main character of Star Fox, Fox McCloud, is, well, a fox, or kitsune, who serve as messengers of Inari, the fox kami of fertility, rice, tea, agriculture, and starships. But as far as the Ocarina of Time is concerned, much of the plot is a reference to fertility. The main character
This was
Star
brilliant.
Fox.
This was
Fox's
brilliant
history
editing.
as
This was a brilliant
storytelling.
editing joke and a wonderful beat, and I talked through it a little bit, but this is fucking brilliant. It's making me feel emotional. I now realise, like I said right at the start, the thing about this, I always felt like emotional connection to Nintendo on a deeper level, and it's because there is a deeper level to it, isn't it? I do think this as well about Japanese culture. I've probably said it before once or twice sometimes, but like probably not that often on our streams, but you know, it's something I've said before in the past to my friends. Like, we lived through the war and we got to be the heroes and win the war in the West and all that business, but like in their country, in their culture, like they dropped bombs on people and then they had the bombs dropped on them, and like it's a different perspective on shit, isn't it? Like, imagine growing up under the cloud of these like historic events that are tragic, like just different. So I think like some of that has come through into this, and I didn't realise it as a kid, but yeah, I totally resonated with some of these ideas. But this editing idea, this joke about the fox of the god of starships or whatever, this is brilliant.
It's just one of countless media companies to incorporate its history as a storytelling device. The main character of Star Fox, Fox McCloud, is, well, a fox, or kitsune, who serve as messengers of Inari, the Fox Kami of fertility, rice, tea, agriculture, and starships. But as far as the Ocarina of Time is concerned, much of the plot is a reference to the very foundation of the religion and the fragile balance of nature and its relationship with humans, and how a thirst for power is quenched with the blood of the innocent. Each race represents a different element: the Kokiri the forests, the Zora water, and the Gorons mountain and fire. And as Ganon gains from his unrelenting greed, nature loses and the people suffer. Upon emerging from the Temple of Time, you're immediately hit with the state of Hyrule under Ganondorf's rule. The once sprawling and jovial town square is now desolate, and the sounds of cheerful conversations are replaced with the wails of the undead. Monsters have overtaken the once serene Kokiri Forest. Death Mountain suffers from constant eruptions.
Yes.
Lake Hylia is drained of its water. Lon Lon
bad.
Ranch is taken over by Ingo, the sinister, greedy, animal-abusing employee of the once kind Talon. The dead are robbed of their peace and are destined to eternally wander the ravaged lands. And the once sacred temples have been corrupted and are now inhabited by hostile creatures and are now funneling dark energy into Hyrule.
It's so simple, isn't it, really? But it's such a great premise, because you see all this stuff and then you want to go and like sort it all out, don't you? Like, it's just such a good premise. It's just like simple and effective. I love it.
The balance between deities, humans, and nature is thrown off, and it's up to Link to restore it, who represents a force of cleansing and helping those in need and purifying the world of its pollution. And, in the process, leaving behind his home, his innocence, and even his childhood.
Old Spice makes all things possible.
Stupid adverts.
Like now, I'm riding a horse backwards.
Stupid adverts. Shut up, you stupid adverts. I've got my shield, look. Got my shield. I think that inside every adult is... I'm going to cry. I don't know why it's going to make me cry. I think that inside every adult is the heart of a child. We just gradually convince ourselves that we have to act more like adults.
One of the core design concepts of the Zelda franchise is the gap in power that's created from the beginning of the journey to the end. In its beginning stages, obstacles are in abundance, and their solutions are few and far between. However, as the player progresses and expands their arsenal of gadgets, puzzles become solvable, and the unreachable is within reach. In Ocarina, beyond a variety of tools, Link's maturation itself plays a central role in this progression, and while this provides a new depth in its gameplay, it does the same in its story. The prospect of growing up and its implications is a foundation of the Zelda franchise and recurs frequently in its many iterations. In Link's Awakening, our protagonist finds himself shipwrecked on the island of Koholint, a dream world suspended in time where the inhabitants never change, and the only means of escape is the Windfish, a creature that's held inside the egg that would become central to the plot. In Majora's Mask, the townsfolk comfortably blind themselves to their inevitable doom staring down at them from the stars. The Wind Waker opens on Outset Island, which is home to his close friends and family that he's known since birth. Or, in the Ocarina, in the idyllic Kokiri Forest, which resembles an eternal playground where the children never age and are isolated from the dangers that lie beyond the tree line. All of these places are their own unique forms of paradise, so why leave them behind and enter these dangerous dungeons and face daunting enemies? Well, to save a princess, to protect the world, or to stop evil. There's always some urgency introduced at the beginning, but its purpose is dual: to progress the plot, and to also whisk our protagonist away from the comfort of ignorant bliss and towards difficult and unknown challenges, to accept the unacceptable, that all living things are subject to the flow of time. Actions performed in the past have consequences in the future, and shape not just the world, but also those who inhabit it. The dialogue is riddled with references to growing up, becoming a man, the right to hoist the Master Sword from its resting place, and to become an adult is only earned after passing a set of trials. Saving the world from insurmountable odds reflects the struggles that all people face, with the dungeon being the substitute for one of life's many challenges. But at the same time, arming you with the tools and the allies necessary to overcome it and the next one that lay in waiting. The bosses, as intimidating as they may be, must be defeated in order to move forward. Beyond the simplistic nature of the timeless hero is a commentary of the nature of time, one that teaches that life's wonder and anguish, splendor and heartbreak, and beauty and tragedy are fundamental components of what it means to live. Being bound to the flow of time is a decision that's made for you, and while its speed seems different for each person, no one can change it. The egg housing the windfish that leads him away from this dream world reflects the process of transforming from a child into an adult. Though it's warm, safe, and nurtures the life held inside, it was never meant to be permanent.
Well, I'm feeling emotional because, like, well done, Mad Season. That's very clever and it is very emotive. I'm also thinking, no wonder I'm so lucky and grateful to have such compelling and rich media to have been able to experience when I was growing up. So, yeah, like, wow. I didn't think of it in that way, but Mad Season's nailed that. It's made me feel all emotional. Good night, everyone. When people go to bed, good night. Good chat there. Your chat is always on the screen, but I'm trying to keep it on Zelda for the video thing. Because I'll cut this and put it on the Super Chuff for you afterwards.
Ocarina innovated the industry in more than just its gameplay. With its cinematic narration, it marked a pivotal moment where the box was opened, and what started as a simple distraction became an entire medium of nuanced and meaningful human expression.
Do you think? I wonder if that is it. Like, the documentary I made was about video games are art. They are. Like, it's almost like the documentary sort of says, should video games be considered art? And it's like, don't be silly, that's not even a question. Let's talk more about what art really is and how we're using these video games to express ourselves. And that was my piece. I didn't realise that when I was playing these games back then, I was playing the sort of iconic piece that would become video games are an artistic medium. Like, they are like, now it's a bigger market than film, bigger budgets, bigger box office, whatever. They make more money, bigger than film. It's bigger than that. Like, he just said it there, that this is like, the one that, took that step. I suppose, like, when you think of it, I mean, because you think of it in polygons and the graphics aren't that good. I don't know if it was like, is it the first big, I don't know if it's the first big one, but like, interesting the way that Mad Season's put in the, I'm going to rewind that just so I can hear it again. Like, go ahead,
just
Mad
its
Season.
Gameplay. With its cinematic narration, it marked a pivotal moment where the box was opened, and what started as a simple distraction became an entire medium of nuanced and meaningful human expression. While most enjoy it for its simple yet satisfying adventure, those who dig deeper may find insight more valuable than a simple game could ever provide. From its opening cinematic to its ending credits, the history behind its conception, design, and implementation is an adventure itself, and consequently has become a focus of an archaeological study of sorts. Both the official release and also leaked pre-release copies have been combed over and analyzed time and time again, and despite the length of this video, what you've seen is just a fraction of what's held inside the box. As with each passing year, new insights of its design and motivations behind it are uncovered by one of the most dedicated fan bases in history. Even though it's now over 2 decades old, either through the original or its re-releases and reworks, it holds a remarkably active community of hardcore speedrunners setting new challenges for themselves, and casual players who simply wish to pay tribute to it. Perhaps Miyamoto is right. Maybe there really does exist the heart of a child in everyone, one that yearns for the impossible, to go back in time and relive the days of innocence now lost, whether it be through the places we grew up in or the things and people we grew up with. The flow of time is always cruel. As it passes, people move. Like a river's flow, it never ends. Though all things, places, and people all eventually fade away, our memories of them live on, and for many, those of The Legend of Zelda, the Ocarina of Time, are ones that will never fade. A legend in more than just name, and an adventure that's most certainly timeless.
It got me in the feels, that did. Well done, Mad
And what's the
Season.
story behind this Link guy?
Well done, Mad Season.
Starts off very young, and gradually through his experiences he grows and he becomes stronger and he matures.
It's a legend of epic struggles, of new worlds, of heroes. It's The Legend of Zelda. The story puts you in the role of Link, who goes on the adventure of a lifetime.
With the development of another Nintendo console came the development of another Zelda game, Ocarina of Time for the N64.
When you're actually developing a game, it's really hard to see how it's going to turn out and whether or not it will be successful. But with Ocarina of Time, when we actually finished working on the game and saw what we had created, we were like, wow, we really may have done something great here.
The game not only met but exceeded the heightened expectations of the media and gaming masses, and continues to be copied to this day.
When it comes to video games, the more bits the better, and the new machine from Nintendo is as good as it gets.
What I'm reflecting on is the idea that they put that depth into it. You know, the reason I'm feeling emotional about it is not just because it's my childhood and remember this, but you know, these stories they're talking about, the battle between good and evil and the balance of the world and the history behind their feelings on it, and you know, loss, time, love. You know, having that depth in it. It's making me get me in the feels now. Now I realise why when I was a kid I was so connected to this media without knowing, you know, why I liked it. You know, I just really fucking love that game, and it's lovely to have it sort of spelled out like that. I didn't know Mad Season was going to do such a good job on that. I thought they were just going to sort of describe the game and talk about what it was, and you know, give us a bit of nostalgia. But I didn't realise they were going to like find the way to hit that in those feels like that about time and all that stuff at the end. Yeah, I thought that was awesome, better than a standard YouTube video. Really, really good. Well done, Mad Season, of course, with their loads of subscribers. So like, well done. Like, they don't need me to be like, you know, drop the link in the description. Wait, you're going like they've got millions of they've got 500,000, but obviously do subscribe to Mad Season if you're not subscribed to Mad Season already, you know. But they don't need me to, you know, their life doesn't hinge on my recommendation. But I love Mad Season, I love what they did with that. And like I said, reflecting on the ideas that, the reason I loved that stuff so much. And I'm so looking forward to tomorrow, to the new Zelda game. Like, that's why I wanted to watch this, to tomorrow we're playing Zelda. Yes, I could understand now why I feel that way connected to it more. Yeah, that's what I was saying about putting the depth in. Like, I'm glad that they chose to. Not everything has to be deep, but I'm glad they chose to put that depth in there, because without it, we wouldn't be doing this now, wouldn't be having this conversation. So I like things with a bit of depth.